Hi there and welcome back. Today I will tell you the story of the youngest fairy princess of Kayangan. But first, let me explain to you a bit about Kayangan. Kayangan refers to a celestial or mythical place. I like to think of it as a sort of fairyland. So the inhabitants of Kayangan, particularly the ladies, are very fond of flying down to earth using either their wings, their magic, or these things called their flying garments, which it just sounds so cool. So they fly down to earth and they love to visit our bodies of water. So think of rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, and waterfalls. If you want to meet a Kayangan princess or fairy, maybe you could visit these spots. Ladies love to take a dip in the pool, and whenever you have a group of beautiful, gorgeous, heavenly maidens, because let's face it, in most of these stories, the maidens are gorgeous, they're ravishing. When you have these women bathing in open areas in various states of undress, there's bound to be trouble, as we will see in the story that I'm about to tell you. Now, there are so many versions of this story throughout the Nusantara. I'm going to tell you a version from the state of Sabah in East Malaysia, and it's called the Tale of Bayagong. Bayagong refers to the man, but in my adaptation, I've retitled the story The Tale of the Youngest Fairy Princess of Kayangan, because I wanted to shift the focus not on the man but on the actual fairy princess, which is what the story is about. So I'm going to tell you the story now. Sit back, relax, have a nice cup of tea, and enjoy. So once there was a man called Bayagong who was not very well liked in his village. He was very self-centered. He didn't care about anyone or anything. None of the girls in the village fancied him. They didn't want to marry him, so he was a bachelor. One day, Bayagong was on his way home from work when he heard the sound of splashing and playing in the nearby waterfall. So being the typical man, he crept up to the waterfall to have a peep, like a peeping Tom, and he saw 7 beautiful, gorgeous, ravishing, heavenly maidens having their bath. He fell in love with the youngest maiden because she was the most beautiful, and he decided there and then that he had to have her. He saw that there were 7 magical garments, and he took the smallest one because he knew that belonged to the youngest fairy maiden, and he hid it. Now, these fairy maidens had a lovely time, and it was already late, and they were getting ready to leave when the youngest fairy maiden found that her robes were missing. So she started to panic, but her sister said, "No worries, we'll come back to get you after dinner. Our dad, the king of Kayangan, will send a search party. Just stay by the waterfall and wait here." So they left her. Now it was getting dark, and she was getting scared, and she was all alone. And it was at this particular time when Bayagong made his move. He approached her and asked her what she was doing there, all alone in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of the night. And she said, "Oh, I'm lost. I'm going to wait for my sisters here at the waterfall." And he said, no, it's dangerous. You must come home with me. I'll take you home to my mother. She'll take care of you." And she said, no, I don't want to. I want to stay by the waterfall. I want to wait for my sisters. But he insisted that she return home with him. And he bullied her and he scared her until finally, because she was so vulnerable, she agreed to follow Bayagong home. And the next day, she hurried up to find Bayagong and begged him to take her back to the waterfall, but he was gone. His mother told the fairy maiden that Bayagong has gone on a business trip. He's away for 3 days. The fairy maiden was distraught. All she wanted to do was return home. When he returned home, she said to him, "Look, please take me back to the waterfall. I need to find my sisters." And he said, yes, I'll take you first thing tomorrow. The next day, when she went to see him again, he was gone again. And his mother said this time he had gone fishing with his friends. So this continued day after day, week after week, month after month, until finally the fairy maiden had to accept her situation. After he bullied her and manipulated her, she agreed to marry him, and they had 2 children. Years later, she discovered her wings nicely hidden by Bayagong, and she realized that her husband had lied to her. He had deceived her and tricked her into staying on earth. And she was livid. She was so angry that she immediately put on her flying garments and went home. She left her family forever. The end. There are many versions of this story in Malaysia. I found two so far. One is called The Three Princesses, and the other is called King Suton's Adventures. There's also variations of these fairy tales, the same kind of motif, but with different characters. In Princess Bunga Tanjung or Puteri Bunga Tanjung, the fairy maiden is discovered not by some odious man, but by an old lady who helps her. Across the Nusantara, there are so many different versions of this story, but I will go through four of them. From the Philippines, we have the Seven Young Sky Maiden. So in the Philippines, they refer to these fairy princesses as Sky Maidens, which sounds quite nice. And also Kimod and the Sky Maiden. From Indonesia, I will tell you the story of Rajapala and Ken Sulasih, and also Goddess Bride. So I want to credit these stories to Dr. Nurul Ikhlas, who wrote a PhD thesis titled Mothers, Lovers and Others, an evolutionary analysis of womanhood in Western Malayo-Polynesian oral traditions. It's a fascinating read. And yes, I do read academic journals and papers. Sorry. So Dr. Ikhlas places these stories under the category of deception by men. It follows the similar plotline as the story I just told you. And in the two Filipino tales, the Seven Young Sky Women and Kimod and the Sky Maiden, the man actually gets a happy ending because he ends up with his wife. The Sky Woman actually knows that she has been tricked and deceived by her husband, but she still agrees to marry him. Once they get their power back, once they get their magic back, they leave. So it's pretty clear here that she's pissed off with him, she's angry with him, she doesn't love him, because as soon as she gets her wings, she flies on home. The difference is, in this story, the man actually pursues her. He goes on a long, difficult journey to find his heavenly wife. He has to go through many trials and tribulations to prove himself worthy, and in the end, because she has seen that he has proven himself, she agrees to accept him as her husband. In the Indonesian tale of Rajapala and Ken Sulasih, we can see that from the very beginning there is some attraction between the two characters. The fairy maiden, who is Ken Sulasih, she thinks he's hot. She's charmed by him. But at the same time, she knows that he's lied to her. So she agrees to marry him only on one condition, which is that when their son turns 6, she is allowed to go home. And she gives reasons for this. Firstly, that she will die. She remains here on earth. And the second reason was that it is her job to take care of the gods in heaven. And if she stays on earth, the gods will be angry with her. So those are the two reasons that she gives. When her son turns 6, she takes magic cloak back and she flies home. And in this particular story, just like the one I told you from Sabah, he doesn't get his wife back. Rajapala and Ken Sulasih is told as a love story. We are told in the beginning that Fairy Maiden kind of loves this man. But does she really? It seems to me that by putting that stipulation that, she's only staying until her son turns 6 years old, she is being calculative. In fact, she is providing herself with an escape route. Also, the two reasons that she uses to leave him, it sounds like a lame excuse, really. Like, I have to go because otherwise I'll die, and also because the gods will be angry with me. I don't think she was ever in love with this guy. Even though the story is framed like a love story, I don't see the love in the subtext of this story. Now, the next Indonesian story, called The Goddess Bride, the maiden is actually unaware of the husband's deceit. She doesn't know that he actually stole her wings. He takes her wings and he hides it under a pile of rice. And she agrees to marry this man. And during the marriage, she's quite content. She's quite happy. Her job was to make the rice. And this man was surprised because they never seemed to run out of rice. That pile of rice that hid her magical wings, it never seemed to grow less and less. So one day he decided to find out why. Took a peep inside the rice pot and found that there was only one grain of rice cooking. You can produce lots of rice from one grain of rice. Unfortunately, because he now has witnessed her power, it disappears because she told him that when a mortal sees her power, she can no longer wield her power. They now have to use the pile of rice. The pile of rice gets less and less and less until it reveals her magical wings, and it is at this point that she realizes that the man had deceived her. Without a second thought, she puts on her wings and she flies home. As soon as she discovered her husband's lies, she was out of there. So what are all these fairy tales about? Is it really a love story? I don't think it is. I mean, the man obviously fell in love with the heavenly maiden because he's gorgeous, but the way he stole her wings, her power, the way that he lied and deceived her is just wrong and odious. And if you truly love someone, you wouldn't do that to that person. So then you might ask, why do they agree to marry these men? Once their power has been taken away, these maidens are in a vulnerable situation. She is physically disabled from running away, and she can no longer fly home, and she is open to being exploited. Secondly, in many of the stories, her sisters leave her. She no longer has a protection of her kin, and because of these 2 points, the maiden is actually not in a position to control her situation. This explains why, in that situation, the maiden might agree to marry the man, because she has to make do with what she has. She has to accept help and protection to ensure her future well-being. My take on this is that she marries the man not because she loves him, but because she has no other choice. She is trying to do the best that she can in her situation. And it's clear that she doesn't love him, because as soon as she gets back her magic, she leaves him. So if this isn't a love story, why do some of the couples end up together, like in the 2 Filipino stories I told you? In both these stories, there is a difference because the man actually pursues the woman. He goes on a long journey. He has to go through many hardships. He almost dies. By the time he gets to her, it is clear that his feelings for her are true. It somewhat mitigates the situation. It proves to the maiden that at that particular moment, the man's intentions are true, and she agrees to accept him. An example of a man pursuing his heavenly wife and goes on a long, arduous journey to get her back is a story contained in the Arabian Nights, which is Hassan of Basra. There are many elements in it, but one that's relevant is that Hassan sees a flock of birds. They are actually magical jinn princesses. He falls in love with one of them, steals her feathers, forces her to stay on earth as his wife, and when she escapes, he pursues her, and it's actually quite bad. He has to go through several hardships. He almost dies several times. By the time he gets to her, she's kind of convinced that, okay, he actually loves me, and agrees to go back with him as his wife. So what is the conclusion in all of this? I think this fairy tale is an attempt to address the balance of power between men and women. Women in particular may find themselves in a vulnerable relationship. In that situation, they have to do the best that they can until the time comes when the power shifts back to them, when they can reclaim back their magical wing and take to the skies. Like most fairy tales, this story gives us something tangible that we can cling to, which is hope. So what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below. Next week, I will be talking about another group of maidens, this time not from Kayangan or above the clouds, but from under the sea. I will tell you the story of Ulit Mayang. I'll see you in the next video.